Hi friends, welcome to Organic True Crime with Sydney Hopes, where I talk about interesting true crime stories. Today I'm going to be talking about kind of a difficult one. It's very interesting though. This month's theme is scams and con artists, and today we're going to be talking about Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael. Now Liz was a transgender woman, so I'm not really going to go into very much detail about her past before her transition. I will still give you the important parts because some of it you have to know for later, and also I think it's important to have a background, but that's it. Liz was born as Geraldine Michael in Indiana in 1927. Jerry eventually had 4 marriages. The first 3 were very brief, but there were 5 children total that came from the first 3 marriages. Jerry never really had anything to do with any of the children after the brief marriages. And Jerry's 4th marriage to Vivian Barrett was very long lasting and where our story kind of starts. At this time, Jerry was making money by selling fake IDs and making fake checks. He had like a whole printer stamp system to make a fake check, and that was how Jerry and those around him were getting by. Vivian, Jerry's wife, was very, very close to her brother, and her brother ended up being involved in everything that they did, so he was also involved with the making of fake IDs and fake checks. And eventually the two did get arrested for this, but Jerry completely took the fall and never gave up any other names. In 1961, Jerry was arrested again for printing fake money and distributing it all throughout California. And this is when Jerry paid bail and then skipped town and never came back and never showed up for court. Jerry did take Vivian and their 5 children, and the whole family started a life on the run at this point. They moved all around the country, they homeschooled the children, and they never stayed in one place for very long. They also made up fake identities and stopped going by their own names. This is also when Jerry transitioned and started going by the name Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael. And I'm not really going to go into it because I don't think it's that important to know for the actual case that we're talking about. But if you're interested, there is a documentary about her on HBO, I think. It's called The Lady in the Dale, and they talk about it a little more in there. So in order to completely shed the identity of Jerry, a fake car wreck was staged. A car was crashed and shot with a gun several times, and Jerry's blood was somehow left inside the vehicle, and that was the way that she fully got rid of Jerry and became Liz. Now, as Liz, she claimed to have both a mechanical engineering degree and a business degree, when actually she had no formal education. She also claimed to be a widow, saying that her husband Jerry died in 1966, which that I understand, just to give some kind of explanation for her 5 children that she had. And Vivian, who continued to be married to Liz, just said that they were sister-in-laws, and that was why she was there all the time, and they were really, really close, and they always were really, really close. Now we're going to shift gears for a minute and talk about a man named Dale Clift. Now Dale was an engineer who really liked riding his motorcycle, but he didn't like that he couldn't ride his motorcycle when it was cold or when it was raining. So he decided in his free time to build a basically all-weather motorcycle. He used motorcycle and small car parts to build an all-weather 3-wheeled car. And this he used just to drive around town. He was really proud of it. He worked really hard on it. It's a really cool thing that he built. So his people say that he drove it any chance that he could. And he lived in the LA area, where at the time Liz was working for a marketing firm. And it's kind of unclear. I read it a couple different ways, that either he went to the marketing firm to try and market his vehicle, or Liz just saw it around town one day and like had someone approach him and say that somebody wanted to mass produce his vehicle. Bottom line is, Liz told him she wanted to mass produce his vehicle because she saw it as the answer to America's fuel crisis that it was currently going through. So, Dale Clift was given $1,000 for his prototype, for the build of it, I guess, for the idea of the three-wheeled vehicle. And he also was given a contract that promised $3 million more in the future. And that brings us to 1973, when Liz Carmichael founded the 20th Century Motor Car Company, which, fun fact, apparently she got the name from her favorite book. So the 20th Century Motor Car Company was started just to produce the Dale, which was a three-wheeled vehicle that supposedly got 70 miles per gallon. Its point was that it was very fuel efficient, because at the time the US was facing a serious fuel crisis because of, I'm sorry, I'm really bad at acronyms, so I'm just going to list it here, had enforced an oil embargo at the time, and it was causing the US to have fuel shortages, and things were looking really bad, when all of a sudden here comes Liz, who again was very charming, and she's saying that she's building the answer to everyone's problems, an extremely fuel efficient three-wheeled two-seater vehicle. And look at its beautiful yellow, because in the 70s everybody liked pea green and yellow, I guess. Liz and her team created this prototype of the Dale. It didn't actually work. It was just a prototype that they took around and showed everyone, and to try and get investors interested and explain that they were going to save the world with it. And apparently, I don't know if this is still a thing. I don't buy new cars, so I don't know. But anyway, apparently in this instance, people could give basically a down payment that to the 20th Century Motor Car Company that they would hold on to. And if for some reason the car doesn't get built, or I guess they change their mind, they will get their money back. And if not, then it's a down payment for the vehicle when it does eventually get made. The rules for this, though, are that the company has to take the money and set it aside and put it in a separate account that just sits there, so that in case the car doesn't get made or the person changes their mind, they can just give their money back, because obviously they can't give it back if they've used it. But supposedly the 20th Century Motor Car Company, that's such a long name, Liz's company did not do this. They used that money for production and to pay for their employees and things like that. And because of this, officials eventually noticed and got involved, and I just looked down and saw something else and just completely wiped my whole train of thought. Anyone else have ADD? Anyway, so a cease and desist order was put out against 20th Century Motor Car Company, saying that they couldn't take any more payments and for vehicles, because they didn't have the vehicle and they didn't have a permit to be taking these payments, and they also weren't doing the right thing with these payments, supposedly, so they had to stop. Around this time, Dale Clift got a $2,000 check from Liz, because I guess she was periodically paying him what she owed him, and the check bounced. And at this point, he just decided to remove himself from the project. He figured this, he got enough from it. He didn't want to have anything to do with something fishy was going on. He didn't want to be a part of it. So they still had the rights to the idea of the car, but they didn't have Dale anymore, and they didn't have his little prototype, which they had their own prototype at this point. They weren't using it. And Dale actually paid his neighbor to store his vehicle in their garage, so that if anybody came sniffing around looking for it, he wouldn't have it. Fun fact, it stayed in that garage until Dale died, and then his family moved and they just abandoned it and forgot about it, and then it just got sold around. But it's still around. It still exists today. People just kept storing it in their garages until the documentary came out, and they're like, wait a minute, that's in my garage. Yeah. Now we get to the part that I find difficult to talk about. Dick Carlson, who was a reporter at the time, became very interested in the story of the Dale and of the sketchiness behind the Dale, and was doing his job as a reporter and got involved, and that's fine. But the reason he got involved is because he met Liz for an interview and he thought she looked like a man, and that made him think that something was up. And I have no comment on that. I have a whole rant at the end, and I'm gonna try really hard to save my personal feelings to the end and just tell the story for now. So, Dick Carlson starts constantly reporting on the 20th Century Motor Car Company and Liz Carmichael just herself. He also brought attention to the fact that even after the cease and desist order was put out, the company continued to take payments without a permit, without permission, when they were not allowed to. They kept taking people's payments. And because of things like this, and because he felt like something was going on, he was able to, during an interview with Liz in her office, was able to take something, I think it was like a drinking glass, that had her fingerprints on it, and he took it and put it away and eventually turned it in to the police so that they had it, which again is fine. Sketchy things were going on, so he was trying to get that out there. And that is all I have to say on that subject at the time. Now we come to a point where the employees stopped getting paid. They weren't getting their paychecks, and they were obviously really upset about this because they all really, really believed in Liz and in the Dale, and they really wanted to be a part of the project, but they couldn't afford to do it for free. So a bunch of Liz's employees went into her office and confronted her about it, and she just said, actually, I just got off the phone with a Japanese investor who is really interested. So they're going to come in a couple of weeks, and we need to have a working prototype. It doesn't have to be finished, but it has to work for them to see, which was a lot further from where the production was actually at the time. But they got to it, and they built a prototype that did in fact start, and they had to do a test drive in front of these Japanese investors that were visiting. And the man that did the test drive, I agree with his point. He wanted to make sure that it was actually safe for the road, so he wanted to do a serious test drive, and he chose a passenger to go with him that was a very large and heavier man to sit next to him. He was a smaller man himself. And he drove the car, and everyone's following him really close behind to see how the car is running, and it was running fine. And it went up, they said it got to like 40 or 50 miles per hour, which even the engineers were like, oh, I didn't know it did that. So it was going pretty well. And then he took a really hard turn and like slammed on brakes and took a really hard turn. And the car kind of came up on, it's hard to say two wheels because there's only three wheels, but I know it went up and then came bouncing back down and continued on. And that obviously made it look pretty unsafe and made the investors not be so interested. And everyone else working for the company was really upset with the guy doing the test drive because they said that he purposefully sabotaged the test drive, which I kind of see both sides of it, because I understand him wanting to do an actual test drive and make sure it's safe, but also at this point it was only supposed to be a prototype that just kind of worked so that they would be given money so that they could make it work. But when the investors see it do that, they're like, oh no, I don't want to have anything to do with this at all. When it was something that could have been fixed, possibly, but I don't know. That's a tough one, but that's what happened. There we go. Now at this point, the 20th Century Motor Car Company was having some issues, so to speak, with law enforcement in LA. So they decided to move their office to Texas because apparently Texas had some different regulations on car production, and they thought things would go better there. And the day that the office moved, that everybody moved, and actually right after Liz got on the plane to go to Texas, Liz had two bodyguards, and they were still at the LA office. And supposedly the two of them got, am I saying that right? Anyway, the two of them got in an argument about an investigator that was getting really interested in their case and poking in their business a lot. And apparently one of the bodyguards, his name was Bill, felt that the best way to get out of this situation is to take care of the investigator. And the other bodyguard, Jake, disagreed with him. And so they started arguing and fighting over a gun because Jake wanted to get it away from Bill so that Bill didn't use it against anyone. And apparently, during this fight, the gun went off 4 times and shot Bill. Anyway, I don't know. It just went off 4 times. So unfortunately, Bill died in the office. This was also obviously just an add to the scandal of everything that was already going on with the sketchy car company, and now there's a murder in the office. But Liz was not involved. Liz was on a plane, had already left. That was proven. So that's all we really need to know about that, I guess. Now, things did not go as well as they had planned in Texas. Officials in Texas were aware of the situation when they came in and eventually did charge them with conspiracy to commit fraud. So those that were left in the company emptied out the bank account and split up the money and went their separate ways. And by the time the police reached Liz's home in Texas, they were all gone, which is not a surprise. They were used to it. They had been living their life on the run, the whole family, for years. So they took off. They were gone. But the police did have a search warrant as well. So they entered the home and they searched it completely. And this is when they officially found out that Liz was a transgender woman, because they found some materials and such in the house. And this is when the media just went crazy. And unfortunately, it was immediately just decided that Liz was just a man posing as a woman in order to get away with her crimes. That is just what that is what the media was putting out there. And saving my comments for later, that's what was happening. That's the difficult part for me. So, Texas officials eventually tracked down Liz's brother-in-law, who she was still very close to. They talked all the time, and they approached him and said, "We know you know where she is. Tell us." And he did. And Liz was eventually found and arrested in her home in Florida. While awaiting trial, Liz was put into a men's prison, and she was kept separate from everyone else and also labeled with a big blue wristband and escorted anywhere she had to go. Unfortunately, escorts are not always reliable. And there was still an instance where Liz's escort just disappeared and several of the inmates severely beat her. Which is just awful. Anyway, Liz was the only one involved who wanted to have a jury trial. She felt like she could really make her case in front of a jury. And she truly, truly believed that she was gonna just get out, that she didn't do anything. I don't know that it's if she believed she didn't do anything wrong, or she just thought she could get herself out of it because she's really good at that. She's a smooth talker. I don't know. Or if she just was one of those people that lies so much that you just truly believe it. Anyway, Liz requested a jury trial, and she actually represented herself, which was really, she didn't do a bad job. Usually that's kind of a little thing, but she was a very smart person, and she still committed a lot of crimes though. But she represented herself, and I think it ended up being like a 9-month long trial. And the court system, I was surprised by this because this did take place in I think it was in 75. It was in the 1970s. But the court system did accept and acknowledge that she was a woman and treated her as such during her trial, and she was allowed to wear makeup and her clothing of choice. And when Dick Carlson was brought on the stand as a witness, and purposefully and continuously insisted on referring to her as a man and saying sir and using other male pronouns. The judge continuously interrupted and corrected him and told him to stop using male pronouns with this woman. And I don't know, I respected that. I didn't expect that coming from a judge in the 70s, but anyway. Several of Liz's employees were brought in as witnesses, and since Liz was representing herself, she was able to cross-examine all of the witnesses. And she asked each of them, if I were to ask you to, would you work with me again? And they all said yes, because they all really believed in what they were doing and in the project. And they all felt that if given the opportunity to, they would build the Dale, and they were being stopped by officials. Now, there was an interesting little tidbit about the jury. Out of the 12 jurors, there was one woman, her name was Mary Thayer, who refused to say that Liz was guilty. She kept keeping the count at 11-1 by saying that Liz was not guilty. And apparently, Mary was wearing this full-length mink coat every day during the trial, and her husband came in one day and didn't recognize it. So the other jurors felt that someone from Liz Carmichael's side had given her this mink coat to bribe her. That was never proven. That was just something that people said because her husband didn't recognize her coat, which doesn't seem super reliable to me, but I don't know. And then, while they kept coming to a standstill with 11-1, Mary being not guilty, she, I guess, started coughing and appearing ill. So the bailiff said she was too sick to continue to be a juror and had her taken to the hospital. And Mary herself said that she was not really sick. She felt pretty much fine, but she felt like she had to go to the hospital, like she was not being given a choice. So she was taken out, and there you go. Now we have everybody agreeing that Liz is guilty. So Liz was charged of grand theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and for selling all those, are they options? Or was it the down payments for taking all those payments for cars without a permit? And she was really surprised by it. She honestly did not think that she was going to be charged with anything. She thought that this trial would be like 4 days long and they would realize that she's not guilty and let her go, which makes me lean towards the whole she lies so much she honestly believes it. Like she thought she wasn't doing anything wrong. I do think it's important to note that Liz had very strong beliefs and was a libertarian and did not think that the government should be involved in her life. But just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean you don't live in this society, you know? But anyway. So Liz was charged, and while waiting for sentencing, she posted bail and she disappeared, because that's what Liz does. And at this point, Vivian and Liz got a divorce. Vivian couldn't handle the life on the road anymore, and she wanted to do her own thing. I don't know. It wasn't like a huge fight. Nothing really happened. They did have a divorce, and they did apparently keep in touch afterwards. But when given the choice, all of the children chose to go with Liz. So Liz and her 5 children went on the run again. Eventually, Liz and her family settled in Texas, where she started a very successful flower company, and all of her children were involved. The whole family was involved. It was their thing. They owned, I'm not sure if they were all actually hers, but the family owned several trailers, and one of them was actually for employees of the flower shop that needed somewhere to live. So they had basically like a compound with all their trailers all close together, and they were running a successful business. Liz was very, like I said, very, very charming, real smooth talker. She was good with customers. She was a great salesperson. She started a lot of businesses in her life, and unfortunately a lot of sketchy businesses. But she was running her flower shop until 1989, when Unsolved Mysteries released an episode, season 1, episode 20, about Liz Carmichael. And she and her family were sitting around the TV one night and they saw it come on and said that Liz just kind of officially accepted that she couldn't keep running away from this. It was never going to go away. And within a few hours of the episode releasing, people called in and told them where Liz was staying and that she was running this flower shop in Texas. Because she was running a popular business. A lot of people around knew her and she loved to talk to people. So a lot of people recognized her. And she was also a very distinctive looking person. She was like 6'2". So she was eventually arrested at her flower shop in Texas and ended up having to serve 18 months in a men's prison and had to be just in by herself in her own cell for the entire 18 months that she served. Not great. But she served her whole 18 months and she was released. And when she came back, the flower shop was still going, but not well. Things were not doing well without her. They just kind of fell apart. But being Liz, she stepped right back into her boss shoes and she picked everything back up and fixed it all. And at this point, they started recruiting homeless people that needed a job and needed somewhere to stay because they had the extra trailers, and I think eventually even more, for employees that needed somewhere to stay. And to me, I think that seems like a very noble thing to do. And the employees that were hired all said that they loved her. Most people around her did, and really, really appreciated what she did for them. She turned their lives around. But when the media found out who Liz was, who this person running this flower shop really was, her whole past, they just went right back at her and said that she was luring in helpless and vulnerable people and trapping them into her compound and her flower business, which none of them ever said was true. None of them ever had any issues with it. They weren't like stuck there or trying to get away or upset that she had taken them in and given them a job and a place to live. But you can word anything in a way where it looks like you're doing something wrong, I guess, and people just couldn't leave her alone to live her life. I don't know. She was a criminal. She did do a lot of things wrong, so it's really hard because I do feel bad for her. I do feel like she wanted to do something and she helped people, but she did it in her own way and with her own beliefs, despite the fact that she lives in the US with rules and regulations, you know? So it's tough. Like, she was doing a good thing, but not in the right way. I don't know. And I think it's just, okay, saving my comments for in a minute. In 2004, Liz eventually passed away she had several different types of cancer at the time, so I'm not sure what the final one was. She did not believe in doctors really, and just, she had diabetes, and they eventually couldn't afford her hormone medication, and then they couldn't afford her diabetes medication anymore, and she just got sicker and sicker and eventually did pass away in 2004. Now, to say what I have to say, like I said, she is a criminal. She did do things wrong, and I do absolutely think that she needed to serve her jail time, which she did. Not willingly, though. That took a long, long time to get her. But I think it is absolutely horrible what she had to go through from the media just because of who she is. Because people thought that just because she was also a criminal, that meant that her full identity was just a criminal and everything she did was just to cover up the fact that she was a criminal. And I don't think that that's true. And I don't think that people realized, or maybe they did and they're just horrible and said these things anyway. I don't know. But after reading about what she had to go through, I mean, it was the 60s and 70s when she was transitioning. There were not easily available resources. Not that they're that easy now, but there weren't resources at all pretty much to transition. So the things she had to go through to just be herself, and then to have the entire world attacking her for it and saying that she was faking and just doing it to get away with her crimes, which she also felt were justified because she was trying to save the world with a fuel-efficient car and just doing it the way that she knew how. I don't know. It's really hard because I do have a soft spot. I know she did something wrong, but I also don't want to be. So many people in her life just adored her and the things that she did, and it's really sad to see what she had to go through in her life, I guess. And for her whole, they wouldn't leave her alone. The media just followed her forever. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that story as much as I did. Found it as interesting as I did. This one, it took me a lot longer to research than I expected because I just found it so difficult to get through and so difficult to listen to Dick Carlson talk about her. It's so frustrating and just it was hard to get through, but I did, and we're here, and I wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to say my piece about it because if she hadn't been a transgender woman, if she was just a woman or just a man selling these cars, they would not have had, nobody would care. It's fraud. She didn't hurt anybody. She took people's money. That happens a lot. But it had to be a whole thing just because she wanted to be herself. And anyway, I will see you next time. Again, this month's theme is, I don't know if I said it earlier, so I say again, but anyway, this month's theme is con artists and scammers. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.